meditation and encouragement this evening. 702, Trust and Obey. And after marking 702, turn to number 343 before Brother David's lesson this evening. The first and last verse, and then we'll have Brother David come and give us his lesson.
Take time to be holy, speak oft with thy Lord, abide in him always, and feed on his word. Make friends of God's children, help those who are weak, forgetting in nothing his blessings to see. Take time to be holy, the world. Each thought and each motive beneath his control, thus led by his Spirit to fountains of love, thou soon shalt be fitted for service above. Well, good evening, beloved. Good evening to those that are joining us online. I know we have quite a few that are traveling. We have some that are a little under the weather. There's a stomach virus going around, so wash your hands, be mindful, because we have quite a few of our number that have come down with some kind of a stomach bug. Now, maybe I should have, well, first, before we move on, I want to again thank the men who stepped up and presented lessons this morning. And I will say this, as I began to say on my very first day, if I can get up in front of you and teach and preach, I'm not the smartest crown in the box. I'm not the sharpest crown or the brightest tool, as I like to say. But you men have the ability, every man has the ability to present God's message, because if it comes from the Bible, it's good. As long as it's sound, as long as it is biblical, then you won't ever hear any complaints from me. And I don't believe you should deal with any kind of complaints from anyone, as long as what you are presenting is true and done in a loving manner. So tonight we're going to begin a series, and I should have maybe thought about this before creating it with everyone on vacation, but it's okay. It's still a good series, and I want us to begin to think about, again, before I forget, keep doing your reading tree, keep filling out the leaves to put on the tree, so that by the end of the year, with everything else being dead, all the leaves around us being gone, our reading tree will be blooming and will be blossoming with life. But this evening, I want us to start looking at the 4 rules that the world follows. And we can sometimes go back and forth between these within ourselves. These 4 rules that you see up on the screen, the iron rule, the brass, the silver, and the golden, these are more of sociological terms, just like we all know what the golden rule is, found in Matthew 7 and verse 12, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so these rules have always existed, though they may have gone by different names. If you do any kind of a Google search, this is predominantly what you will find. That historians, that sociologists, people who study societies and mindsets and cultures will basically narrow down these 4. And what is interesting is when we begin to study these 4, we're going to start at the polar opposite. You have the iron on one end. Might makes right. I take what I want because I simply can, and you're weak. To what Jesus shows us in his life and in his ministry of a life of servanthood, a life of love. And so I want us to understand that every culture that has ever existed was held together by one or more of these rules. And we're going to look at and compare these to where our nation is. And we're going to look throughout the Bible and see how these philosophies were plaguing the people during Jesus' time, during Moses' time. And we're going to see which one we need to put our effort in, which one we as God's people need to try to be. And I'm going to kind of just give you a Cliff Notes version. We need to be over here. We need to be a people that follows the golden rule. We need to avoid the iron. We need to avoid the brass, the silver. We need to be a people of the golden rule. A quick rundown, and we'll go over this in the beginning of every lesson, but the iron rule basically means might makes right. I'm stronger, you're weak, so it gives me the opportunity and the right to take advantage of you. Because I am stronger and you're weaker, then I have some kind of right to take advantage and to harm you. You have the brass rule. This is basically where the Old Testament principle, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, makes sure that the punishment is equal, is fair. Well, the brass rule is you leave me alone, I leave you alone, but when you attack me, I'm going to attack you. You have the silver rule, which is I'm not going to hurt you in hopes that you do not hurt me. And then we have the golden rule, the one that Jesus taught us. According to Pew Research Center, it revealed that 68% of Americans believe it is entirely possible to be moral and have good values without having their morality governed by religion. I want us to think about the danger of that. How can we say that our morality is guided by something that is not divine? You know, I've had this conversation with some of my family members that morality has to have a constant truth. There must be a constant truth, a divine standard, because as we will one day, maybe hopefully, study the war and flu debate, Brother Warren told Dr. Flu that if our morality stems from our culture, then what the Nazis did was completely fine, because according to their set of values, they saw the Jews as less than. They saw gypsies as less than. They saw different people of different cultures as less than, and they were ruled by the iron rule. We're stronger, you're weaker, we have a right. Survival of the fittest. Again, all of these kind of statements, all of these kind of people are using the iron rule. And so as morality detaches from absolute religious truths, it's going to be perverted. Because if our morality is not governed by book, chapter, and verse, or by what God demands and says, then we're going to manipulate our set of morality as our culture changes over time, and cultures change. Naturally, we will change as a society. But what should not change is the morality that governs God's people, the Bible, governs our way that we define what religion is, what service and what love is. And so the idea that morality can exist without a constant variable, God, that is a dangerous and flawed mindset. And so in America, we have never been more divided. And some of you might be thinking, well, back in this time or this time, there was a benefit to living before the internet. Because someone that you disagreed with, you only had to deal with them when you actually kind of came into contact with them physically. Very rarely did you waste the ink and the stamp and the paper to send a hate letter. Now, there were some people that were possibly like that. But in today's society, you can send someone an email out of hate, filled with hateful speech. You can send them a text filled with hate. You can send them a Facebook message. You can post something about that individual. And so we are a divided people as a nation. And primarily it's because we are struggling between these rules. We can send emails, texts, make memes, create videos bashing people. And so I want us to believe that it's possible to fix ourselves. But in order for us to truly achieve living the golden rule, we need to ensure that we're not coincidentally living a double standard. That we're not taking on attributes of these other three, because we may confidently and proudly say, there's no way I'm living my life according to the iron rule, but you might be guilty of living according to the brass or according to the silver. None of these are acceptable in the eyes of God, because we have been given a divine standard, a divine way. And so what is the spirit of the iron rule? Many cultures and societies have always had a strike first before they can strike us. Destroy them before they can destroy us. And in a war, as a military, there is some sensibility in striking the enemy first. But what governs the iron rule is we don't want anyone to be able to compete with us. We don't want to let them grow up into a formidable foe. And so we're going to keep them in check by constantly destroying them, constantly belittling them. Strength, rules, authority dominate. Selfish ambitions are very prominent in a society that is filled with this. And so society and empires, the world has always glorified power. And how does the world define what is power? Well, usually military strength. How many nations have you conquered? How many people have you subjugated under your reign? That is how the world defines power. You can translate that into the business world. You can translate that even into our society. How many people fear you? I don't know. Who cares? But there are some people who that is what they live for. And so the philosophy of this is the strong survive and the weak serve. I want us to go to Mark chapter 10, because Jesus brings this up, and he tells us here in Mark chapter 10, verses 42 through 45, about how the kingdom is supposed to be different. And this is, the famous spot where the sons of thunder are asking for seats of prominence. And look at what Jesus says in Mark 10, 42 through 45. He says, "But Jesus called them to himself and said, 'You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them.'" The idea of lording it over them is they are lording it over them through force, through tyranny. The idea of Gentiles is everyone else. This is how the world operates. Specifically in the Gentile world, because they know not God. And so he says they lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be a slave to all. That's pretty strong. That is a stark contrast to the way that the world works. Oftentimes you ask someone, why do you want to be a manager? Why do you want to be a boss? Besides the prominence, besides maybe the pay raise, I want to give orders. I want to boss people around. I want people to fear me. I want people to look at me and see me as a person of authority. That's the wrong mindset. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Church, we need to avoid the iron rule at all costs. This iron rule, it dominates, it controls, it subdues, it exercises mastery over others. It is me, 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 my will, not yours. Over and over and over again throughout Scripture, we see that God's people are to look out, yes, for your own interest. There's nothing wrong with making sure that you have enough bread on your table, that you have a roof over your head, that your family is taken care of. But to also look out for the interests of others. That is completely devoid of logic within the idea and within the realm of those who are dominated by the iron rule. Jesus is describing here how the world functions. And consider the depths of trying to instill fear. In Daniel chapter 3 and verse 15, we see that the Babylonian Empire ruled by fear, throwing those who would not bow the knee into a fiery furnace. This was not the first time that this fiery furnace was used, that these three young men were thrown in. It had been used in the past. It was a tool to dominate. It was a tool to instill fear. And why did they see their ability to say, throw these three in? simply because they saw themselves as being, we are superior because we're stronger, you're weaker, you're not listening to me, so I'm going to destroy you. And so Nebuchadnezzar lived by the idea that might makes right. The entire Babylonian Empire had this idea. And so what governs this is pride. We can read in James chapter 3 and verse 16 a warning about this and how this idea and this mindset, heart set, is very dangerous. In James chapter 3 and verse 14, we'll begin here. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. Societies, nations, individuals that are following the iron rule it's all about them. It leads to abusive leadership. It leads to dictators becoming evil, violators of dignity, of human rights. It leads to manipulation and intimidation, to division. And so a heart that is filled with sin will constantly try to elevate itself. Consider what Isaiah 14 says. Isaiah 14, beginning in verse 13. Isaiah here is writing basically to a people who have exalted themselves, and we see this throughout the Old Testament. Oftentimes it was the widows that were being taken advantage of. It was the less fortunate that was being taken advantage of by a superior economic class, and they saw their right to step on their own, to devour their own, simply because we're better off than you, we're more important than you, you're less than, you have less intrinsic value than me, so I'm going to subjugate you. Look at what Isaiah 14 and verse 13 says. He says, "For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the furthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to soul to the lowest pits, the depths of the pit." So this is Isaiah speaking not about Satan, because you can go down to verse 22, but again, the Babylonian Empire. Verse 22, "For I will rise up against them, says the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and the remnant and the offspring of prosperity, says the Lord." This is not about Satan being cast down. This is about the king of Babylon. He had taken opportunities that God had given him. He had taken blessings that God allowed him to have, and he distorted them. You can read how God destroyed the Assyrian Empire, and he tells them, you were destroyed because you took joy in destroying and in punishing my people. They were not destroyed simply because they punished the northern and the southern kingdom. That was their purpose. God allowed them to. But because they had this sadistic, vile enjoyment of putting on suffering and making people suffer, that is why they were cut down so violently by God. But God will be there in the end to rebuke. Who made verse 17, "Who made the worlds as the wilderness and destroyed its cities? Who did not open the house of prisoners?" Verse 18, "All the kings of the nation, all of them sleep in glory, everyone in his own house." Verse 19, "But you are cast out of your grave, like the abominable branch, like the garment of those who are slain thus with a sword, who go down into the stones of the pit like a corpse trodden underfoot. God does not want us to be a people that are ruled by the iron rule. A heart that is controlled by the iron rule will not divert course unless they are destroyed, unless they are beaten. Think about Pharaoh. In Exodus 5 and verse 2. We think about why they began and why they desired to bring the Israelites under bondage. Remember, it was fear. We need to subjugate them for fear that they will grow and be a mighty people and that they might align themselves with one of our enemies. So we need to nip it in the bud. We need to strike first, beat them down, keep them from becoming this great nation. And we're doing it simply because we have the ability to do it. And so when we forget that we are not God, and each person has intrinsic value, we're going to find ourselves guilty of this. I want us to consider ancient Rome. Ancient Rome conquered nation after nation after nation. The iron rule was one that Rome followed. Again, Daniel's statue, remember the dream of all those different metals? Which nation was the Iron Nation? Now, societies have always glorified themselves in their weapons, glorified themselves in their military might and strength. And Rome eventually collapsed internally through corruption, immorality, greed. And so what are some dangers if we find ourselves as a society that follows this iron rule? If we, as a people, as husbands and wives, as the church, well, it destroys relationships. Colossians 3 and verse 19, husbands, yes, we are the head of the house. But Paul tells us there in Colossians 3 and verse 19 to not be lords, to not be a tyrant, to love our wives. We are to love them. Fear may produce outward compliance, but true companionship and true loyalty will not be there. It produces isolation, Proverbs 18 and verse 1. Consider what Proverbs 18 and verse 1 says. Because if we want to avoid this, we need to understand its destructiveness. In Proverbs 18 and verse 1 says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. I don't care that it doesn't make sense what I'm doing. I don't care if you see the end, even though I cannot see it. It opposes the Spirit of Christ, Matthew 11 and verse 29. Christ said, I am lowly and gentle in heart. My burden is light. Christ is the complete opposite of this. And the church, I have seen Facebook groups or Facebook posts about elderships who lord their authority over the congregation to where they run it like a slave camp. And it's despicable. It saddens me. Christ possessed all authority, Matthew 28 and verse 18. But yet he taught those in power not to lord it over others. Just as Peter teaches in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 3 through 1 and 3. Peter says, the elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Jesus Christ, and a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God. Peter here doesn't say, rule it with an iron fist, whip them into shape. He says, shepherd them. Now, does that mean that the elders cannot at times be a little bit forceful? No, they need to be forceful. Just like that stubborn sheep sometimes needs a good kick. But that shepherd does not constantly whip that sheep. He says, shepherd the flock which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain. Again, being an elder is not about having a power-hungry trip, but rather an opportunity to serve a greater purpose. Nor as being lords over those entrusted to you. Again, the role of the elder is not to be a king, not to be a dictator, not to be a slave master, but an elder, a shepherd, a guide, but being examples to the flock. And so what happens is, if we are guilty of this, if we allow this idea to run rampant, then it's going to allow us to be guilty of being abusive of power. Just as we see those warnings of the eldership, well, the elders over the Jews were constantly rebuked for abusing their power. Ezekiel 34 verses 2 through 4. Because what happens is it will eventually lead to your own destruction, because you are constantly seeing yourself as above others. And you're in this mad dash of life to put everyone else in their place. It ruins your relationships, it ruins your companionship, your trust, and you don't have respect. You only instill fear and hate in others. Proverbs 29 and verse 1 says, he who is often rebuked and hardens his neck. This is someone who, nope, I know what's right. I'm stubborn. You're wrong. He who is often rebuked and hardens his neck will suddenly be destroyed. So how do we rise above this iron rule, which is at the complete opposite of where we need to be? Well, how do we rise above it? Jesus. Philippians 2 verses 5 and 8 reminds us to take on or have the same mindset that Jesus had. Let this mind be in you. The idea and the meaning of let this mind be in you is let this character be in you. Let this perspective be in you. Let this way of life be in you, which was first in Christ Jesus. You know, we talked about this in Bible class this morning. Hank brought up the life of Christ, and there it tells us that Jesus, the Son of God, subjugated himself to his parents. When I really think about that is just wow. That two individuals had dominance, had authority over Jesus Christ as a child. And he willingly put himself in that, and he allowed himself to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. He went and cleaned his room. He went and did this or that because these individuals told him to. let this mind be in you. We need to learn servanthood. Christ washed the feet of his disciples. Yes, they recognized Jesus' authority, but he did not lord it over them, and he even washed the foot of Judas, who he knew would betray him. John 13, verses 14 and 15. Christ himself used greatness as an opportunity to serve. Kingdom leadership is not demanding. It is not intimidating. It is not self-promotion. Kingdom leadership is sacrificial. But ultimately, how do we rise above the iron rule? Well, we subjugate ourselves. We submit to the will of God. James 4 and verse 17. Submit to God and he will lift you up. People are obsessed with controlling others. When those who are obsessed with controlling others are very rarely willing to allow themselves to be controlled by someone else, even God. And so we go back to Pharaoh. In Exodus 5 and verse 2, Pharaoh shows his mindset and his heart set. Pharaoh sees himself as the biggest dog on the block, the very top of the totem pole. And he says a statement that is so profound that when we look at it and we actually understand what he is saying, and we look out at the world and we look, because we ask ourselves, how can someone do that to someone? We think about how could the Nazis have done that to those that they put in concentration camps? How these dictators violate their citizens in such ways that is evil. You know, being a leader of a non-democratic country, there's nothing wrong with you being a king. There's nothing wrong with you not allowing your citizens to vote and to pick their course in life. There's nothing wrong with that. Jesus Christ did not tell every king, let your citizens vote and determine their own course in life. He said, love them, rule them with compassion. Do not abuse them. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him? You see, those that are dominated by the iron rule, they do not conceive that it is possible that they're wrong, that there is somebody above them. Who is the Lord that I should obey him? You know, Alexander the Great, we studied him just a little bit in our intertestamental overview. You know, Alexander the Great conquered much of the world by the age of 30. He was a beautiful logistic leader. But again, it was reported that when he had conquered all that he did, he sat down and wept because there was no one else to conquer. External conquest could not satisfy the internal emptiness that he was feeling. You know, the iron rule promises power. It promises power, authority, fulfillment. But it will always lead to spiritual poverty. It will always lead to desiring more and more. The iron rule says, use people to build yourself. Build your kingdom on the heaps of their bones. Jesus says, serve people for the glory of God. The world admires iron strength. Heaven admires Christ-like humility. So ask yourself this evening, am I harsh? Am I controlling? Do I devalue other people because I'm of a particular skin color? Do I devalue people because I'm of a particular socioeconomic class? The Iron Kingdom rules by fear, nothing else. There in Daniel 2 and verse 40, it says, "And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron." Again, Rome. Rome ruled with iron weapons and military dominance. And they conquered much of the world. But Christians conquered the hearts of much of the world without swords. Iron can force submission, but iron cannot transform character. I want you to ask yourself, go through the book, read it, and look, did Christ conquer the world through dominance? Through lording his, I'm the Son of God, you need to listen to me because I know better and you don't? Or was it sacrificial love? Was it, I'm from above, you're from below. I'm here to help. I'm here to teach you a better way. You know, this evening, if you are not a Christian, I want you to understand that in life, we have two choices. There are two paths in life. There's to the left and to the right. The goat and the sheep. And this evening, we studied the iron rule, and you have a choice. I'm going to live my life by the iron rule, by one of the other rules, or I'm going to live my life by the golden rule that we'll study here in about 3 weeks. Ask yourself, am I a Christian? Do I desire to be a Christian? You cannot be a Christian and live your life under the iron rule. You cannot become a Christian if your life is dominated by this mindset. Because in order to become a Christian, it is not my will, but God's. But maybe you are a Christian this evening, and maybe you have done God. Maybe you've seen what God has done. God sent His Son. His Son bled on the cross. The Spirit revealed the Word. You believed. You were baptized. You became a child of God. But maybe this iron rule has crept into your life. Maybe you are beginning to live your life in not a good way. If we can help you in any way, if we can pray for you, pray with you, if we can study with you, let your requests be made known as we come together and as we sing.
When we walk with the Lord in the light